Big verdict Friday, Samsung versus Apple. Obviously, Samsung didn't win. They lost to the tune of $1 billion. What happened inside that jury room? We've got Jessica Vascellaro of the Wall Street Journal joining us now from San Francisco. Jessica, big night Friday. You found out what really went on inside that room.
Indeed. So in talking to some jurors over the weekend, we sort of got behind these 22 hours of deliberations, which the world thought was pretty quick for deciding a case this complex. And it turns out that a lot of people on the jury had some technical experience and just sort of plodded along methodically through this sheet. And there were a couple of big sticking points, but in general, I think people went in really feeling like Apple had proved that Samsung had copied the iPhone and the iPad, and Apple had just made a better case.
Now, you say in their story that the communication was just better and presentation was better from Apple. Where did Samsung, in the view of the jurors, fall down?
Most of the jurors, actually, when I asked them that question, they defaulted back to what Apple did right, which I think is interesting. I think Apple, from their point of view, had a lot of evidence that was just convincing. One example, this slide that Apple showed again and again throughout the trial was Samsung phones and how they looked before the iPhone came out, and the Samsung phones and how they looked after the iPhone came out. And one juror in particular said that slide to him just resonated from the start. And so people were really talking a lot about the different pieces of evidence that Apple presented. It was interesting. One of Samsung's, probably a big part of their argument about that Apple was infringing their patents came down to some very technical patents around data transmission. And the jurors told me that they found that Samsung's argument just didn't hold up because the company that actually made the chips that Apple used, which was Intel, had a license for those patents. So all along, Samsung was arguing Apple was infringing 2 data patents. Apple said, no, we're not, because we get the chips from Intel, and Intel has a license. And the jurors told me they found that incredibly convincing, and that was one of the easiest things to decide in the case.
What was the hardest thing that they had to decide?
Well, one juror told me actually the first patent was a big sticking point, and that they actually skipped it and came back to it later. And that was the bounce back patent, this idea that when you scroll on a phone and reach the bottom of the page, the screen bounces back a little. One question there was whether there was prior art, evidence that someone else had actually come up with this first, and that would have maybe invalidated the patent in the first place. And I think that one of the pieces of prior art was this touchscreen table. And there was a lot of debate, from what I was told, over sort of that table and whether that constituted prior art, and a lot of looking at videos. So that was one point. Another issue which I thought was kind of neat was one patent related to the icons and just how they looked. And did they look similar in the Samsung device? And there's a lot of debate over that, but how they resolved it was they turned off the lights, they held up the 2 phones in the dark, and they figured if you sort of got a similar feel when you were just looking at the icons, that would constitute enough similarity for infringement. And they found that, in fact, there was a lot of similarity, and decided with Apple on that point.
Okay. Well, it was a tough job for them. And obviously, Samsung walking away with their tail between their legs for the time being. Anyway, thank you very much. Jessica Vascellaro of the Wall Street Journal. More on that on WSJ.com.